Now, EDM is one of the biggest music genres in the world, selling out festival after festival all over the globe. But where did it come from and how do you make it? All that and more right after this. Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am your host, Vortex, from MobileMusicPro.com, your home for mobile music production. And if you are new to the channel, what we do here is release weekly videos teaching people how to produce music on their iOS device. Now, according to Wikipedia, EDM is a broad range of percussive electronic music genres, first designed for nightclubs, raves, and music festivals. And despite the industry's attempt to create a specific EDM brand, the EDM term today is still used to define a whole umbrella of electronic music genres. And some of those genres can include things like dance pop, house, techno, drum and bass, and trance, and of course any of their respected subgenres. Now, of course, I am an American in his late 30s, so to me, the EDM sound typically sounds like something from David Guetta, Calvin Harris, Dada Life, Steve Aoki, Tiesto, Avicii, R.I.P., and Nicky Romero, Zedd, Martin Garrix, and a bunch more that we just don't have time to list here in this video. These types of songs are typically characterized by those 4-on-the-floor drums, big huge layered and sidechained synths, and long builds that often lead to big drops. And most of these tracks typically have a tempo of around 128 BPM. It really is crazy to see how far EDM has come since the late 80s, but one thing is for sure, EDM is definitely here to stay. So without further ado, let's hop right into Cubasis and start breaking down this EDM track. So what we're going to do first is play you this track, and then we're going to walk you through its various elements by breaking down each one of the sections one by one, such as the drums, bass, chords, and melody. And do keep in mind that we pretty much only used our premium voltage sample packs to create this track, and you can grab those both right now at MobileMusicPro.com/voltage. Alright, now let's go ahead and get started with this song demo. Alright, now we super hope you enjoyed that track because we definitely had a blast making it. Alright, now let's get into the first section of this video, which is going to be drums. Now, as we said in the intro, dance music is typically between 120 and 128 BPM, and as you can see for this project, we chose to go with 128 BPM. Now really, the drums in EDM can range from super simple to extremely complex, from just that simple kick and clap to something with a bunch more percussive elements, for example. But for this track, we definitely kept it simple because as you can see, we pretty much only have a kick, clap, and hats. And we do break up our drums into both verse and chorus sections. And if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see both our drum buses. Here we have our verse drum bus, and then we have our chorus drum bus. And both of these are just going to have a simple compressor in them here. And I believe they are both using the same preset, which is the tight mix bus preset, with some small little tweaks I did here and there. Now, if we zoom into our verse drums here, again, you can see we have that kick, clap, but for the verses, we actually ended up adding a snap as well. And we did that to separate the verse from the chorus because the chorus is going to be using those big reverbed claps. So let's solo these now and hear what this pattern sounds like. And then you can hear that clap that we're using for the first part of the build-up. And for the kick sounds, we are using the drum kit voltage 10. For the clap, we're using voltage kit 9. For the snap, we're using voltage kit 2. And then for this hi-hat here, or this open hat, we're using voltage kit 2 once again. And both of our voltage sample packs each come with 10 drum kits each. So there should be plenty of drum sounds in there to get you started. And if we quickly take a look at the EQ for this kick here, we can see that we are removing a bunch of the sub-frequencies. And that's because all of the kicks in both our voltage drum packs does come with the sub-bass baked in. So I just wanted to remove that a little bit here for the verse. And we do that so that we can make room for our sub-bass track up here, which runs all through the verses. But then for the chorus, we stop playing the sub-bass track here and instead keep that sub-bass inside of that kick. So let's quickly solo the two kicks so you can hear the difference. Here is the verse kick. And here is the chorus kick. And that sub-bass is definitely going to bring a ton more energy to the overall chorus. And we did end up using the same clap as we did in the build-up over here, but for these hi-hats here, we ended up throwing on a Bleece sidekick so we can sidechain those. And we don't bring those into the second part of the chorus so that we can build more energy as the song goes on. So now let's go ahead and solo these drums. And of course, that was the 4 on the floor pattern that is found in so much electronic dance music. Alright, now the next section to discuss is going to be the chords. Now we used pretty simple chords here. In fact, for the most part, we used simple triads. If we take a look here, you can see that we're using the same chord progression throughout the entire song here. Now all the chords down here and the chords during our build-up, they both contain the bass notes, but we removed the bass notes for the rest of the chords here. And if we open one of these up here, we can see that we are using these simple triads, but they are definitely open chords, which simply means that the notes are going to be more spread out here. This is going to give you a bigger and more full and rich sound. Now for the sounds used here, we can see that we're using just a stock piano here inside of Cubasis. And then for the second chord track here, we are using the SynthShot 31 in our voltage sample pack. And for the third and final chord track, we're going to be using SynthShot 29 from our voltage sample pack. So the basic idea here was to combine both the piano sounds and the synth sound. So let's hear these 3 sounds individually, and then we'll play them all together, starting with the piano. And then next up is a piano from our sample pack. And I wanted to layer these 2 pianos together because I liked the lows from this sound, but I liked the highs from the original piano in Cubasis. So if we look at our studio EQ, we can see we're cutting off the lows here for the stock piano. And then for our piano, we're keeping those lows and cutting off most of the highs. So together they create a pretty unique piano sound. And now let's hear the third and final sound, which is going to be a synth, and it will be sidechained with the Bleece Sidekick plugin. And all 3 together, they sound like this. And again, it is the same pattern throughout the song, except for the build-up right here, where we do a bit of a different pattern. So to recap there, we layered a couple of different piano sounds. We used pretty much the same pattern here and the same chord progression, except during the build-up. And that was done to create more and more energy for the build-up so that we can get you super hyped for the chorus. Now we have our chorus pulled up here, and as you can see, it is that same chord progression, but instead of each note lasting a full bar, they are chopped up here so that you can really get that electronic music dance vibe. And we have our chorus chords here split up into 4 different tracks. And each one of these is going to be sidechained using the Blease Sidekick app. Now, it's really important in most EDM genres to get that really big synth festival sound. And to do that, you will need to layer a bunch of different synths together. And then you want to EQ each one of those tracks so that each one is contributing to a unique piece of the overall stereo spectrum. So if we take a look at our EQs here, you can see for the first synth track that we are ducking the higher frequencies here. And then for the second synth track, we're actually raising those frequencies. Now, the sounds that we used here for the first synth track is going to be synth shot 1. And then the second synth track is going to be using synth shot 13. The third track will be using synth shot 15. And then finally, the fourth synth track is going to be using the synth shot 18. And then when layered all 4 together, you get something that sounds like this. So definitely a big sound there, taking up a huge chunk of the stereo spectrum. So for the chords, we mostly used the piano during the verses, and then for the chorus, we layered these big synths together and sidechained them all so that we can make room for that big kick with its sub-bass underneath. Now the next section we're going to discuss is going to be the melody and counter melody. Now we are using the same melody in verse 1 and verse 2, but we are using different sounds for the second verse, and we'll get into that in a second. And of course we are using a completely different melody for the chorus. But first, let's take a look at the verse melody. So if we take a look here, we can see we have our standard melody here, and then a counter melody played by 2 different sounds. So if we open up our melody, you can see it's pretty simple, just following the chord progression there. If we take a look at our counter melody, it's just going to be the standard 8th notes, alternating between bottom notes and top notes here. And again, following the chord progression. So for the actual melody, I think we're just using the stock piano, inside of Cubasis. And then for the counter melody, we'll be using and layering a couple of different sounds from our pack, including synth shot 2 and synth shot 5. Now let's first hear the piano melody, and then we'll take a look at the counter melody. All right, very pretty. Now let's take a look at that counter melody here. Let's listen to the first sound first, then we'll listen to the second, and then we'll listen to all 3 of them combined. So in a lot of EDM genres, it's important to have 2 different kinds of sounds in your melody, and one of those is going to be a pluck, and the other is going to be a bell. That was the bell sound there. So now let's hear what the pluck sounds like. And there's not a whole lot of processing on these melodies here, just a studio EQ and channel strip for the piano, and then for these 2 counter melody sounds, it's going to be the wider plugin on there. So now let's hear all 3 of these together. Now, as we said, we did end up using different sounds for the second verse as opposed to the first verse. So if we swing on over there here, we can see that we ended up using an acoustic guitar. And if we open up the MIDI, you can see once again it is following the same chord progression, but we actually used Scalar to create this guitar MIDI. And then for the sound, we used the acoustic guitar pack inside of Sample Tank. So let's hear what that sounds like. We'll play the acoustic guitar melody first, and then the synth counter melody after that. You can definitely hear a little processing on there. We have the Red Rock Sounds EQ 550 using the Guitar 4 preset. And then for the send effects, we are using the Crystalline app by Baby Audio with the Acoustic Guitar Sauce preset, and then just the standard stock delay inside of Cubasis. Now for the counter melody, I wanted to use something a little bit different than the guitar, so instead of a piano, I ended up using a synth to keep the song fresh and sounding a little bit different than the first verse. So if we take a look at the sound used, that is going to be SynthShot 17 from our voltage pack. Let's hear what that sounds like by itself, and then we'll play it with the acoustic guitar. Alright, now let's hear that with the acoustic guitar as well. Alright, very pretty, sounding pretty good there. Now let's go ahead and move on to the chorus melody. So if we scroll on down here a little bit more, and take a look at the sound that we will be using for our lead synth, that is going to be SynthShot 9 from our voltage pack. And this is a pretty standard chorus melody for EDM, where you want to keep it nice and simple and on beat. Again, to not distract too much from the drums and the overall energy those drums create. So let's have a listen to this now. And we do have some processing on there. As you can see, we have the Woot plugin using the default preset with just a couple of adjustments to the output gain here. And then in the send effects, we do have a reverb and delay. So nothing too crazy here. And of course, then that filter to filter this in and out as the song is playing. So it's definitely okay to keep your melodies simple, as long as you keep them interesting by filtering them in and out and using different sounds to play that same melody. And the next section we're going to be discussing is going to be the bass. Now, once again, we do have a different sound for the verse versus the chorus. So if we take a look first at our verse here and zoom in a little bit, this is going to be our verse bass, and this is going to be our chorus bass. So for the verse, I just wanted to do a simple sub bass here, because of course the verse is supposed to have less energy than the chorus. And if we take a look at the pattern here, it is going to be just that simple chord progression that we've been using through the whole song. It is going to be those same bass notes that were found in some of our chords. Now, as far as processing, of course, we have an EQ on here, so we can add a little bit more sub bass here and sweeten that sound. In fact, it's probably a little bit too much. Probably should take that down just a little bit. And then, of course, we're cutting off all of the highs here. Now, before I do play this, you probably want to put on headphones because this is not going to translate very well over a laptop and phone speakers. So let's hit play. So definitely a pretty standard sub-bass sound there. And for the sound that will be coming from the microlog stock synthesizer inside of Cubasis using the double bass or the double sub-bass preset. Definitely a super handy sound to have. Now let's move over to the bass for the chorus. Now here we're using two different sounds, but as far as the pattern goes, it is pretty simple, just using those same stabs as the chorus, following that same chord progression. And for these two bass sounds, the first one is going to be using bass shot 1, and the second is going to be using bass shot 11, again from our voltage sample packs. And the reason why I used two different basses here is because I like the higher frequencies from one and the lower frequencies from another. And when you combine them both, they create a pretty thick and full sound. So let's hear the first sound now and then hit play. All right, now let's hear the second sound here. If we take a look at our processing here and take a look at the EQ for the first bass, you can see that we are keeping some of these higher frequencies here. But for the second one, the EQ on the second bass track, we're cutting all of those off. And now let's hear them together, and they should create a pretty thick bass sound. So definitely a nice and gritty sound there, perfect for electronic music. And now for the final section of the video, which is going to cover effects. Now effects are a super important part of all electronic music genres. In pretty much every single song you're going to find a riser, a downlifter, various reverse sounds, big old impact sounds, and of course, snare builds. And we indeed have all of that in this track. So if we take a look here, we have 4 different effects tracks, one of those being our snare build. Now this is a pretty special snare build that we'll get to in just a second. But first, let's take a look at these whooshes here. So what I have here is a downlifter with a bit of a riser built into it. And then after that, I have an impact. So let's listen to those two first. And then next, I use that same sound, but I replaced the first part of it with a reversed sound, which is a completely different sample from this downlifter. So let's hear these two together. And immediately after that, we have our first riser to really start building that energy. And then we repeat using those same sounds throughout the song. I do have a couple more impacts, but before we get to those, let's take a look at this snare build. Now the reason why this snare build is pretty special is because it actually has a few different elements built in. So the first one is it has an impact at the beginning, and then of course it has that snare build element, but then it also has a riser built into it as well. So 3 different elements built into this one snare build. And of course all of these effects, the risers, the downlifters, the reverse, and this snare build is found in our voltage sample packs. So let's go ahead and hear this snare build, which is definitely important for virtually every single EDM song. And it actually has a 4th element that I forgot about there, which is that snare hit at the very end. Now typically you're either going to have a snare there or some kind of a sound effect. What's used pretty often is that very famous Prada snare, and I didn't use that here because we already have a snare built into that sound. And of course because I have limited time to create these tracks for these videos. So it was definitely pretty cool having all of that built into one single sound. Now let's take a look at the remaining effects here, which is going to be a downlifter and a couple of different hits. Now here you can see that I combine 3 different sounds here at once. I combine a downlifter, an impact, and a subdrop. So let's hear these individually and then all together. All right, now let's hear all 3 of these together. All right, a very cool sound there, and it does look like I do have one impact hit here from Cymatics, but definitely everything else here is coming from our voltage pack. These FX sounds and transition sounds are super important to keep your listener interested and to act as a guide to let them know when a new section is going to come in and when the previous section has ended. All right, and now it's time for our final thoughts. And if you are still rocking with us, we just can't thank you enough for being here, especially those folks that are here every single Wednesday and Friday to watch our live streams and our live premieres. Now we really hope you did enjoy this breakdown video because, just like I said in the last one, this really is one of my favorite types of videos to make. And we've got a bunch of these on the channel as well, such as pop, lo-fi, and of course our very last video, which is how to create a house track. And we will be creating a bunch more of these types of videos as we release new sample packs in more and more genres. And as we said, the term EDM is pretty subjective these days, so please don't hate us too much if we didn't quite nail the exact type of EDM genre that you like. But hey, if you do enjoy this particular flavor of EDM, then you're definitely going to love our brand new voltage sample packs that we've been releasing over the past couple of weeks. I really think that these packs totally nail that EDM pop sound and come with everything that you need to create that next banger track. And if you want to know when we release more of these sample packs, or have new giveaways, or have new contests, definitely sign up for our completely free newsletter at MobileMusicPro.com/newsletter. And so, until next time everybody, keep talking music, and we'll see you later. Hey everybody, Vortex here, and if you're not aware yet, we now have over 100 fully edited mobile music tutorial videos. And we make music every single Wednesday live on our channel right inside of Cubasis on our iPad. Plus, we also have a bunch of free sample packs, guides, and more at our website at MobileMusicPro.com/free. And so if you are into that sort of thing, producing music on your iPhone or iPad, then definitely make sure to subscribe and check out the rest of the videos on the channel that we know you'll love.